Hello, friends. Welcome to our podcast, Your Story, Your Glory. Today, we have an amazing guest with us, Avish Parashar, a computer engineer turned an improv artist who started Polywampus Improv Comedy in Philadelphia, turned a motivational improviser, teaching valuable lessons of business such as creativity, innovation, and adaptability. He's also being a past president of NSA chapter of Philadelphia.
Avish is the author of Improvise to Success and the Amazon best-selling Say Yes and. Avish is low maintenance, non diva, but high energy speaker who makes his audience play improv games and moves his presentation from informational to experiential, where they get to practice and apply the lessons right then and there. Today, we are also going to have some powerful lessons from our conversation with him. So let's welcome Avish Parashar.
Welcome, Avish Parashar, to our podcast, Your Story, Your Glory.
Hi,
Welcome,
thank you,
Avish.
Deepak, honey. Thank you very much for having me.
We are actually excited to have Avish today. Avish is an amazing motivational improviser, the two best of the world coming together. And Avish, we are looking forward that your story is going to inspire our audience, ourselves, and yes, many who would get to tune the YouTube as well.
Fantastic. I'm happy to chat and share and help however I can.
Thank you, Avish. Hani talked about motivational improviser, and that's what we read in your introduction. And this is the first time I heard this word. Motivational speaker, I have heard, but motivational improviser, I've never heard. Before we go more into your motivational improviser journey, let's start from the beginning. When was the
Mhm.
first time, Avish, you performed on the stage?
The very first time that I recall being on stage was in third grade, as part of like a day camp. I remember we went on a stage for a very short show at the end of the camp. I remember that. I don't really remember anything about the play or what I did. I would say the first real time I was on stage was in high school. I remember I had no aspirations of acting. It's just that freshman year, first semester, the school play was having auditions, and I was playing with a friend after school, just hanging out. And I just said to him casually, I was thinking about trying out for this play. And he said, oh, I was too. And he said, oh, you want to go together? And we said, sure. And we both auditioned. We both got little small parts. And, from that moment, I then was involved in every single high school play. So that's really where the
Wow.
journey started.
Good. And how this whole performance on the stage finally lead to improv and then to speaking business?
Okay, well, this is my journey, I guess. It depends how long you want this story to be. But I was doing theater in high school just for fun. And when I went to college, I was a very good Indian American boy and went to get an engineering degree. And I know how, college can be different than high school. I knew how hard it was going to be. So I said, all right, I'm not going to do any theater in college because that was just for fun. It's going to take too much time. But then a friend actually told me about improv comedy. And what's funny about that is he said to me, and I tell this story in some of my keynotes, he said, Avish, you should try out for the improv comedy group on campus. You'd be very good at it. And I, of course, immediately said, yeah, but that's not for me. Like, I'm here to do engineering. I've never done improv. I wouldn't be good at it. And I hadn't even seen the group perform, but I just knew. And he nagged me for months until finally I went and saw a show. And the moment I saw it, I'm like, that's amazing. So I auditioned, I got in, and again, it was just for fun. I had no aspirations. But by the time senior year and I had to start deciding what to do with my life, it was again other people that were saying, are you going to keep performing? You're very good at this. You should keep going. So I didn't start out as a speaker, but after college, I started my own improv group here in Philadelphia where I live.
Oh,
And I was like, I'm going to turn this into a huge theater. It's going to be like the second city of Philadelphia. That didn't happen, but because I was trying to do that, I started reading everything I could about goal setting and motivation and business and marketing and leadership. So I started seeing connections. I'm like, oh, I'm teaching this in an improv workshop. This is very similar to what I'm reading in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
yeah.
And so through that, I started doing team building workshops. And eventually I decided it was time to move on from that dream of building my improv group. And at that point, I'd started getting that, learned a little bit about the speaking business and training. And so I was like, all right, well, I always wanted to do this someday. I thought about doing this someday, and now it's yeah, I don't know what else to do with my life at this point, so let me start my speaking business. And that was almost 22 years ago now. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, 2003 is when I closed up the improv group and started the speaking business. So that's the
Going back
journey
to
of how it kind of
engineering.
went from theater in high school and engineering to speaking business.
And Avish, you never felt like going back to the engineering?
An engineer talking.
No, so what's funny is that so I ended up getting a computer engineering degree, and for a while I did work jobs in IT, just make money while I'm building an improv group, and for a little year there while I was doing my speaking. And what's weird is I really enjoy computer programming. Like I could program all day. There are aspects of it I really love. I just never found it fulfilling. So it was
Hmm.
enjoyable in the moment, but I was like, when I quit my job, my IT job, it was a really good job. I liked the people I worked with. A friend from college worked with me. I had benefits. It was a major, Fortune 100 company. And I just was like, this is great, but if I'm still here in 10 years, then I haven't really done with my life what I had always thought I would. And so I like engineering, but it wasn't going to fulfill me in the long term.
I like this. It was not fulfilling. And I think when something fulfill us, we enjoy it.
Yeah, and that was important to me, and I was fortunate to be in a position where I could take those chances at that point in my life.
Awesome.
And I just found a commonality, right? Because I'm an engineer and I did computer engineering, and then I didn't find myself really enjoying my work. So I
Uh-huh.
thought, no, that's not for me. So yeah, that's the reason I asked you the question that would you ever want to go back to engineering? But yeah, I think passion is what drives us stronger, right?
Yeah, and if you can find some way of following your passion that also makes an income, enough money to make a living, isn't it? Because some people have a passion where it's like, all right, I'm not sure how it's going to work, but if you can
Yeah.
find a way of meshing the two, which when you're doing something like improv comedy, there's not a big paying market for that. There's a couple of avenues you can go. And so that was the other reason for the speaking is that I perform improv every time I speak. So it gives me a chance to keep doing something I really love in the performing aspect, but tying it into something that's a little bit more marketable, makes more money. And the thing is, throughout this whole process, I always used to really enjoy the teaching process. So whether it
Mhm.
was teaching improv classes or workshops, or I did martial arts for a long time.
Oh,
And what I loved the training, but I really loved the teaching. And for me, speaking is a way of combining those two things. Like speaking is performing, but it's also teaching. So it combines kind of the two things I really love the most.
interesting.
Avish, I particularly feel that not many people still understand the real concept of improv. We would like you to educate our listeners on the difference between comedy and improv.
Sure. So there's confusion there because there's stand-up comedy, which is usually one performer, they're on a stage, and stand-up comedy is very scripted. And some of the confusion comes around in that one of the most famous stand-up comedy theaters is called the Improv, which is very weird and very confusing because it's not improvised at all. I mean, there's a small number of comedians, but most of them it's very well scripted. In fact, Seinfeld is famous for saying he would spend an hour trying to script an 8-word joke down to 5 words. Like that's the level of precision that stand-up comedians take. Improv is there's no script. You have nothing scripted or planned in advance. And you just take the stage, and there's a couple of different forms. The one I did is called short form game based. And so what you do is you have rules. So you'll start a scene or a story, sometimes by yourself, sometimes with other people. And there might be rules, like, for example, every sentence you say has to start with the next letter of the alphabet. Or I
Ah,
do one where someone rings a bell, and every time they ring the bell, you have to go back and change what you said, repeat it, but make it something different. So it's also called new choice. You have to make a new choice. And so you don't plan anything. You often get audience suggestions, and then you kind of weave and create comedy on the spot. So even though there's confusion between the two are almost diametrically opposed in terms of how you perform them. And as someone who's done improv for years, and for a long time, I ran a group and we had auditions. The people who would audition, who were almost always the worst at improv, were the stand-up comedians because the discipline and the skills are so complete. Now, some people can do both, but the discipline and skill are so different that the stand-ups would come in and try to treat it like a stand-up scene, and it would just bomb miserably.
I think that's a great insight. And just to add to it, and I think we
Hmm.
would want you to highlight is it being in the moment, which is really important. And it's not just for improv, I think for everything improv. It can be a song, it can be anything else, not just a joke, but you have to be 100% here, present in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the main things we teach. And one of the things I used to say when I was teaching improv is if you're telling a story or if you're acting out an improvised scene, the minute you think ahead and get an idea for, ooh, I know where this story could end up, that's when you've lost. Because what happens then is you get this tunnel vision and everything you do, you lose your creativity, you stop collaborating. So being in the moment is incredibly important for two reasons. Well, probably more than two. But number one, it helps the collaboration because for the most part, you do improv with multiple people. And so if you're not in the moment, you don't hear what your partner is saying, you don't support them, you don't build off them, number one. Number two, being in the moment is the key to opening up creativity. Because like I said, if you're thinking ahead, you're now limiting your creativity, you've got tunnel vision. When you're in the moment, then you can freely sort of let those creative ideas flow and pursue them in a way. So yeah, it's probably one of the hardest things for new improvisers to learn because it's so different than how we think as people. But just letting go and being just in the moment and focusing on your one next step is absolutely the key to improvising.
I think Honey and Me comes from this whole background of training. And when you are talking just now, and I'm sure Honey must be thinking, and I'm also thinking at this point of time, that all the things that happen on the stage when 3 or 4 people are performing improv are all the competencies that normally that you use in your organization, whether it is creativity, whether it is
Mm-hmm.
present in the meeting, whether it is being leading a particular segment or immediately changing your scenario, and so all those things get applied in our day-to-day corporate life.
Absolutely. And that's essentially the premise of my whole business is that life is improvisation. We don't have a script. We may have plans, we may have ideas, but you go out and you try to implement and something unexpected is going to happen. The prospect is going to respond unexpectedly, or your employee is going to say or do something you were not expecting. And it's how you respond to those improvisations. So it's the same skills that in an improv comedy stage, you can use those same skills to work effectively with other people. You may adjust the dials a little bit, in improv, as a performance, you might do it a little bit more absurd to add to the comedy. Whereas in business or the real world, you might be a little bit less comedic, and more connecting and empathetic, but the same skills apply.
Absolutely.
Now, moving from that very understanding of improv to the favorite phrase that we have, which is definitely what Avish is smiling at, which is yes and.
Mm-hmm.
And we would love to know, how did you move from yes but to yes and in your personal life? And so powerfully that it became the most critical phrase of your life. You have written a book about it, you deliver engaging talks about it, and much more.
Sure. So just for context, the simple thing of saying yes and instead of yes but is one of the fundamental ideas of improv comedy. It leads to collaboration if I'm working on stage, and we're doing a scene and Honey, you say something to me like, oh, hey, here's the report you asked for. And I say, oh, but I didn't ask you for a report. That's me. You've just tried to create something in our improv scene. If I say, but, I've negated what you said and I want to move the scene in a different direction. If I say yes and like, oh, this is great, and I want you now to be the lead person presenting this to the client, right? That moves the scene forward and it supports you. So it's this idea in improv. And what I started to find is off stage, this fundamental shift from but to and transforms everything from communication to creativity to responding to change. Now, how I have learned to apply it in my own life, it is honestly an ongoing struggle because all of us tend to default to yes, but. Yes, but is faster, it's quicker, it's easier, it's safer. And as someone who teaches it, it's just constantly having it in my mind. And number one, it's being aware as I'm saying it. So I become very consciously aware when I'm saying yes, but to an idea, whether it's someone giving me feedback, and or whether it's harder even in personal life. So it's my wife telling me to do something or saying I didn't do something, whatever it is. Number one, you have to be very aware of it. Number two, really making the switch from yes, but to yes, and is all about controlling your emotional response, right? Yes, but is very much an emotional reaction. It's I'm angry, I'm stressed, I'm upset, I'm defensive, I'm uncomfortable. So it's sometimes it's just pausing. It's before I snap back to what you said, I'm going to pause and let the emotion kind of process and go away before I respond. If I don't have that time, if it's right in the middle of a conversation, it's being aware of that emotion and having that conversation in my own head. Like, I'm about to say yes, but why am I doing it? Let me at the least, let me keep my mouth shut. At the best, let me see how I can say yes and. So it's a constant battle, but it really comes first by being vigilant in your head, and two, by being aware of what you're feeling and how those feelings are driving your responses.
I can visualize what Hani was asking to you, that how do you move from yes but and yes and we are so habitual of saying yes but, yes however, you know, so we're so habitual of it and we don't even know that unconsciously we are doing it. Am I right?
Yes. Yeah, it's an automatic thing, which is why so I talk about like it's almost a 4-step process. The first step is reflecting. So the first level is just leaving a conversation or situation and looking back on it and saying, oh, you know what? In that moment, I had a real yes, but mindset. They were giving me some feedback and I didn't like it. So after the fact, the second level is right after you say it. So we're talking and I say, oh, but Deepak, that's not what you should do. And then immediately saying, oh, I just said yes, but. Then it's in the middle of the conversation where it's right before I speak. I'm about to say yes, but I catch myself before I say it. And then the fourth level, which is where it becomes a habit, and then you automatically start defaulting to yes and without having that need for the conscious process. But it all starts, if you try to jump to the first level, you'll give up because you're like, oh, this doesn't work. If you start at the fourth level, you start at the first level, which is, oh, just reflect back over some of your difficult conversations or tough scenarios and how did you respond in that moment.
Can you quickly give us an example in corporate life when, let's say, somebody is asking you something and you normally say yes, but how do you switch from yes, but to yes and?
Sure. So here's an example. I had heard back from, I did a keynote for an HR human resources group. And afterwards, someone reached out to me in email and they said, oh, this was cool. Their company was reorganizing and relocating a lot of their people. And a lot of the employees were unhappy about this. They had to move, they had to change. And so this HR rep was hearing a lot of complaints. And the standard response for her had been like, yeah, but that's just the way it is. Like, yeah, but it'll be fine. Or yeah, but the company made this decision. So what she did the next time then, she's like thought about this yes and idea. When the employee came in to complain about it, instead of jumping in and correcting them about, but you have to deal with it, she's like, yes, and tell me more about that. Yes, and like, how's that going to impact you? Yes, and what are you planning on doing about that? And what ultimately happens there is that it's not a magic wand. The employee didn't, at the end of that conversation, be super excited to now be relocating.
Yeah.
But what it did is it lowered their emotion and anger, and it got them pivoting. A lot of times people just need to talk and vent.
Yes.
And when you say yes, but you're giving them something to fight back against. When you say yes, and you're empathizing. And then what happened is at the end of this conversation, the employee left feeling heard, listened to, and understood, number one, which is a key to retention and culture and engagement. And number two, they had started shifting their focus from being negative about the move to at least thinking about how they could move forward, how they could make it better. So what this HR rep did is they caught themselves, right? Switch from the normal yes, but response and say, how can I say yes and here? And that just completely shifted the dynamic of the conversation.
Interesting.
And that's actually very powerful to move from a negative direction to a positive direction where at least the person is listening. And I think in the last 10 minutes, Avish has already given us a 4-step framework of how to move from yes, but to yes, and, right, Avish? So would you like to reiterate with step number 1 is reflection, and step number 2 is writing after, right? Right after
Immediately
saying,
after, yeah.
immediately after saying it.
Immediately
Talk.
after you say it. Yeah. The first is reflecting back on an earlier situation just to be aware. Then it gets to a point where you start noticing right after you say it, and then you can still change it. Then it's right before you say it, and then it becomes a habit where you don't have to think about it.
I think it is not only a tool of improv comedy, but it's such a powerful tool that can change the perspective of our professional and personal life. How do we connect, relate, and give more power to those relationships? Am I right?
Yeah, it's both. It's a relationship, but it's also self. I mean, it's
Ah,
absolutely transformative in relationships, right? I found it in my own marriage. I teach this stuff, but early on, I found myself being very defensive and yes, but, and that would lead to some arguments and things like that. And over time, realizing that, oh, you teach this stuff, like you need to apply this not just to your audiences or to work, like you need to apply it in your own personal life, and it transforms the dynamic. In fact, one time um, I was at this dinner, a friend's birthday party, and I see the friend whose birthday it was. She's pointing at me. She was talking to her friend who I couldn't. It was a long table I couldn't see, and she's pointing at me, saying, "That's the guy." And afterwards, I asked, "What was that all about?" She's like, "Oh, that I was talking to my friend Diane, and Diane was just talking with us, saying that, oh, Jen saved my marriage because she taught us that we were yes but people, and we would have thought we both say yes but to each other, and then we just switched to yes and when we started switching to yes and, that really saved our marriage." And so at this party, Jen is like pointing, like, that's the guy I learned it from, because she had heard me talk about it. So it's like, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a counselor, but it has this like tremendous potential to absolutely transform our dynamics in our relationship. And I think that all you have to do is ask, if you're listening, or ask yourself this question: if you work at a job, or even not in the world, what would your life be like if every person you encountered started with a default mindset of yes and with you? Like, they wouldn't necessarily have to associate, they wouldn't necessarily have to agree with everything, ultimately do it, but they at least started thinking, how can I say yes and to this? Like, the quality of your life would be exponentially improved. Now, we can't wave a magic wand and have everyone else say yes and to us instead of yes, but we can start, right? We can, quote unquote, be the change we want to see, right? We can start by switching our default to yes and instead of yes but.
wow, so powerful. I heard a lot about yes and, but today I'm understanding more deeply what is the power and how it changed the total perspective, how we look at the world and how world looks at us.
It
Yeah.
does. And if I could add the thing I started saying is, it's also, I think, the biggest relationship where we say yes but is our relationship with ourselves. I think we all have an inner critic and inner voice, and we get this little idea like, I should do this, I want to try this project or start this business, or oh, I should go, go play with my kids or whatever it is, and this little yes but kicks up in our head, like, yeah, but I'm tired, or yeah, but it wouldn't work, or yeah, but maybe next year. And that is this little voice. We don't pay attention to it, but it just undercuts us and holds us back from everything we deserve. And when we can identify what that is and switch that yes but and say yes and in the face of that yes but, like, that's when, like, one of my favorite things. I speak mostly professionally, right? I don't do a lot of like public, just straight motivation. It's all a business or an association bringing me in, so it's all sort of professionally geared. But what I love is, after I speak, sometimes I'll have someone come up and say, oh, you really, that really made me think that I've been saying yes but to myself about this like creative thing I wanted to do, and now I'm going to say yes and. Or one time I did a 2-day program where I did like the opening and closing, and I did the opening, and the next day when I went back for the closing, this woman came up to me. She's like, I had been like a writer and I'd worked on this screenplay, and last night when I got back to my hotel room, I opened up my screenplay, that I haven't looked at in a year, and started working on it again. And I'm like, that's, as much as I love helping businesses with their bottom line and helping teams be more effective, like, when that message just hits an individual to just say yes and to themselves, and that inner desire and dream they have, like, that I think is what really gets me excited and pumps me up.
I've heard this from when I was learning more of public speaking, that whatever you say and you use but or however after that, it negate everything. And today we are learning what should we replace that but and however with, that is yes and. Avish, apart from yes and, if you have to give us or our audience 3 tips that can change their life for better in their personal and professional arena, what would be those? From improve. 3 tips from improve.
Okay. Number one is, it is in the uncertainty where the magic happens. And so what I mean by that, and this kind of comes back to that creativity and not wanting to have the pre-planning and the tunnel vision. And most people don't like improv because they don't like uncertainty. They don't want to get up with nothing planned. They're afraid, well, oh, if I say this, where is this story going to go? Where is this scene going to go? But when you let go of that need for control and certainty, that's where the magic happens, right? That's what opens up your creativity. And that's all I do with improv is, people think I'm a very quick thinker in improv, and I guess I am, but it's only because I'm willing to take a step into uncertainty. And what happens is when you take a step, not knowing exactly where things are going to go, and you're present, going back to Honey's question from before, is you start seeing things and opportunities come out, you start moving the needle. So for example, this kind of comes back to the saying yes and to yourself, is a lot of people have that little voice in their head to do something and they say yes, but it's because they want certainty about how it's going to work out. Like, if I go have this conversation with this person, are they going to respond positively? Or if I sign up to take this class in the evenings, is it going to pay off? And in life, we can't have 100% certainty. So the more you're like, you know what? When I step into uncertainty, that's where the good stuff's going to happen, because one of three things will happen when you take action. Number one, it'll work. Great. Number two, it won't work. And that's actually a good outcome as well, because you can let go of it, right? Because so many times we have an idea we've had in our head for like years, and until you act on it, it's never going to go away, which actually blocks new ideas. So once you act on it, all right, it didn't work, fine. Now I've got room for new creativity. And number three, what I think is often the most common one, is it doesn't work the way you expected, but it opens a new door.
Yes.
So I started an improv group with a vision and a dream of creating this thing. That didn't fully work out the way I intended. But guess what? That's what opened the door to my speaking business. And now I've been doing that for 20 years in a way that's almost better than the improv, because I get to teach, which I also love, and I get to help, and I get to see impact, right? With improv, I love performing it, but I didn't have that impact on people other than making them laugh, which is beneficial and great. But now it's like, oh, someone may actually take this and go pursue their own dream, or be a better leader, or a better spouse, or so that's the first tip I'd say, is if there's something you're uncertain about the outcome, step into that uncertainty, understanding and believing that that's where the magic happens. The second thing builds off of that is that, because that's scary, I say just focus on taking very small forward moving steps, one little step at a time. Which is weird as a motivational improviser, because we've all heard motivational speakers get up there and talk about taking massive action and jumping in with both feet. And you got to burn your boats and super. And I don't know, that's exhausting and has never really worked for me. Usually what happens is you burn out very quick. You take massive action, and after 2 weeks, you're not doing anything anymore because it's too much. Or it just becomes a reason to procrastinate. You're like, well, I'm going to take massive action, but I can't take that massive action until I have a little more space in my calendar. So let me get these ducks in a row. And then 6 months have gone by and you haven't done anything. So in improv, right, it's about one little step. And you take you act, then you analyze, how did that work? What happened with that step? And then you adjust. Say, oh, let me make this slight adjustment. And then you take the next step. And then analyze and adjust. So act, analyze, adjust. And by taking that one little step at a time and being willing to the feedback and to making adjustments, you may end up somewhere completely different than you intended, but it's going to be much better, right? And as people who do speaking and Toastmasters and things like that, I mean, you know that the first version of your speech is never the final version of your speech.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you get up, you put together your speech, and then you deliver it. And the places you thought people would laugh, they don't, but then they laugh somewhere randomly. And the thought you thought you'd have this emotional impact, just glazing eyes. And so you go back and you say, all right, how can I tweak this? And what do I keep? And what do I change? But I think outside of very specific areas where we know we're supposed to do that, we forget that that's the model that makes progress and helps us moving forward and keeps us progressing. It's not about eating the whole apple in one bite. It's about little bites along the way. And this is all improv comedy. It's just, all right, let me just take my next step and see what happens. Let me take my next step and see what happens. And eventually you end up somewhere good, which I guess would bring me to the third tip I'll give, is that be willing to fail. I think that's the other thing that lets me do improv, where others are afraid of it, is I've done it for so long, I'm willing to fail. Number one, I've done it so long, I know how to make it not fail, which doesn't mean it doesn't sometimes fail. But if it does, I'm just like, all right, that didn't work well. Let's move on. And so if you're act, analyzing, adjusting, you're going to fail a lot. If you're stepping into uncertainty, it's not always going to work. We can't let that fear of failure hold us back, right? Failure needs to be seen as a learning point and something that's acceptable. In fact, I've heard multiple people say it, so I can't cite one source, but the simple truth is if you want to succeed more, you have to fail more, right?
Yes.
The more you fail, the more likely you are to succeed. And I love, it's funny, there's in improv comedy, you often get suggestions from the audience, right? And I still do in my keynotes, I'll get a suggestion. And over the years, I found there's two kinds of improvisers. There's the kind that they want suggestions from the audience where it's something they sort of have done before, so they're comfortable with it. Or when they hear the suggestion, their mind immediately is like, oh, okay, I can work with that. And then there are improvisers who hear a suggestion that they haven't heard before and are like, oh, I have no idea how that'll work. Let's do that. Because it's like, I'm willing to fail. So here's an example. I was doing a company keynote, and I end with this improv game. It's a high energy improv game. And I always get a suggestion from the audience of a random activity or hobby that I'm going to tell a story about. And, I get things, a lot of things like skydiving or cooking or ice skating or curling or whatever. And someone in the audience, this is a company event, so the whole company's there. Someone in the audience yells out strip clubs. And I'm like, all right. I'm like, are you saying working at them or going to them? He was like, going to them. I'm like, all right, well, number one, that's an interesting thing to yell out at the, and so most people would say, oh, it's a professional environment. No, I'm not going to do that. And there are definitely sometimes I hear a suggestion. I'll be like if I get something political or something religious, I'll make a joke. Like, I don't want to get in trouble. But most who hear strip clubs are like, oh, that's going to be inappropriate work. But my thought is, well, I've never done that before. I've never heard it. And it's a challenge. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do that. And then I did it. And I did it in a way that was not offensive, that was still funny, and everyone loved it. And so it's like that willingness to fail will often lead to much higher success. Occasionally, it leads to a little bit of failure. But if you're thinking in terms of small steps, the failure is never all that great. That's why these things all kind of work to step into uncertainty, think one little step at a time, and be willing to fail. And that's kind of the key.
So beautiful.
Thank you.
Don't you think, Deepak, we already have like a mini workshop with Avish where we understood what is improv, then we got to know about the yes and we got to know the 4 steps of how to get to a habit of yes and now the 3 tips, and not just this, but actually a personal journey where how can we bring our inner critique to move from yes but to yes and.
Yes, and
I think, Avish, this is more of a workshop that we have gone through, and it's amazing. And I would want to switch it a bit to move it to a rapid fire question.
Sure, absolutely.
If you're rapid fire questions, I would have some 6 or 8 questions which I would ask, and you would have to answer it in that very minute. Are you good with that?
Sure, I think so.
let's have some
I
fun.
I think I can do a little improvisation here. Put me on the spot.
Cool. So let's try it out. I'll shoot the question and you have to answer it in not less than a minute. So the last Indian meal that you had.
Oh, I guess it would be from an Indian restaurant. No, I made a version of butter chicken at home. So,
Wow. One dish that you can have you can have for the rest of your life.
Cheeseburgers.
Cheeseburger and not butter chicken? Okay.
I love butter chicken. It gets heavy, but cheeseburgers plus a variety of cheeseburgers, right? I just love that is my post-speaking meal. If I go to the airport after I speak, give me a beer and give me a cheeseburger, and I'm a happy man.
Okay, so now we know how to make Avish happy with a beer and a cheeseburger. Your favorite travel destination where you don't mind going 10 times as well?
Ooh, that is a very good question. Let's see. My favorite, I mean, the first answer that came to my mind is Las Vegas, but that's not true because Las Vegas is really kind of annoying. It's very expensive, but it's just like very glitzy. So I love going to New Orleans, mostly for the food. And I have really enjoyed every time. This is a weird one. I've been in Indianapolis many times for speaking for some reason, and I always really like that city. I like the airport. It's a small, manageable city. I can always get good food there. So the clever answer or the standard answer is Las Vegas. It's cool, but I don't know. I like the small town feel of Indianapolis. So that you probably never had a person say Indianapolis as a travel destination. So I'm going to go with that.
Awesome. I think
Okay, that's good. One celebrity that you would like to go on date with.
Whoa. Oh God. I'm gonna say, oof. See, I'm also trying to think if my wife is ever gonna listen to this podcast. I gotta be a little careful. A celebrity I'd want to go on a date with, it would probably be some person who's both funny and very successful. Because I would like to learn from them, but also have a good time being with them. So I'm gonna go the first answer that came in my mind, which is the weird one. Is Jennifer Garner. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's an actress. But I follow her on TikTok and stuff. And what I love about her is every posted content is very personable and sort of funny and engaging. So I think she'd be fun to talk with. But she does a lot of interesting stuff in her business and community. So she's not just an actress. She's got a company that does like kind of farm to table type stuff. And so being able to enjoy the company of someone, but also then learn a little bit about, okay, how did you build this business? How do you transition? So I think that's kind of who my pick would be for that.
I'm sure you would want to have this part of the podcast go to her as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
Yeah, cool. We'll try that. One thing that you learned from your kids.
One thing I learned from my kids is to this is weird as an improviser, but it's to um sort of care a little bit less about being weird. Um, they have their kid things that they like to do, especially my younger son. He does a lot of weird things, and I kind of play off of that with him. But like if I'm on an improv stage, I give myself total permission to be weird, but off stage I'm shy and introverted. And
yeah,
so
I've seen
I'm
that.
learning from him them a little bit more about being more willing to be myself and express what I like. And it's okay if some people think you're weird. Um, because it's okay to push some people away because it's going to attract more of the right people.
Okay, that's cool. One moment in past that you want to go back and relive as is.
I would probably say something early on with my wife, probably our honeymoon, because that was pre-kids, who I love my kids very much. But there's this a whole different dynamic, and right when you're on your honeymoon, talk about being present. It's one of those few times where you have total permission to just be absolutely in the moment,
Yeah.
even though there's life in the world, like you are just able to focus um in that moment with your wife before all these other responsibilities and things like that. So it's kind of the most in the moment with my wife situation I'd ever been in, and I'd love to be able to relive that if I could wave a magic wand and do it.
Why don't you plan another one then?
I would.
And
It wouldn't be the same because you'd still at the back when you've got kids, they're always in the back of your mind.
yeah, another moment from the past where you want to go back and change it.
Ooh, a moment is an interesting question. So I'll I don't want to make it seem like I regret anything. The one sliding doors moment of my life, if you're familiar with that movie, is like you kind of two choice in a moment you have a choice. The one
Yeah.
question I will always have is I had a decision to make after college: is do I stay in Philadelphia and start my own improv group, or do I move to Chicago and start taking classes at Second City in Chicago and try to work my way through that system, joining the cast and all that? And I made the decision to stay in Philadelphia, and it worked out great for me. It's a decision that's the one question I'm always going to have, is did I make the right decision? So I would want to go back and potentially make the decision to move to Chicago just to see what if I tried that path? I'd like that question answered. Obviously, it's a magic thing, so I wouldn't want to not have my wife and my children, but I would like for a career path, I would like to make that decision just to see how that would have worked out for me.
Okay, that's cool. And the last question. Tell us a question that you won't like to address.
A question that you could ask me that I would not like to address.
Yes.
Is probably why did it take you so long to figure this business out? Like, why? I guess the question is, why are you not more successful than you currently are?
Okay.
I mean,
So
I
we
don't
are
know.
not
I mean,
going
I'd
to
probably be willing to address that. I don't know if there's anything that's kind of off the table for me to talk about, but that's like the question I always ask myself, and I'm constantly working on as an individual as well.
Okay. Cool. So that was the question I had not planned for, and I think I'm happy that it was not there in my list. But I hope you liked the rapid questions, Avish, and we also enjoyed having all these answers. While we
Absolutely.
are having fun with these rapid questions, and in the last 5 minutes, Avish, I would really want uh, that you can host one of your favorite game, which can be just like a 4-5 minute thing, right here, right now, an improv game that you would want to host for us today.
That I would play right now on camera?
Yes.
Sure. I guess we'll go with my probably my what I would say if I have a signature game, which is called Ding. Um, Normally I do it with a bell. So what I'll do is when I do this is how I open all of my keynotes is I get a volunteer on stage, I give them a bell, and then I say, okay, I'm going to start telling you a story. And anytime you ring the bell, I have to stop and change what I said. So for example, and I'll do it by clapping hands for this example, is once upon a time there was a girl who had a pet dog. Once upon a time there was a girl who had a pet cat, who had a pet mouse, who had a pet giraffe, who had a pet sweet potato. Like whatever. Every time the person rings or claps, I change. When they stop ringing, I keep going, but only as if the last thing was said. So in this example, the dog, cat, mouse, and giraffe would be gone. We'd have a story about a girl and her pet sweet potato. All right, so that's all there is to it. So I'm gonna need one of you to be my hand clapper for this exercise.
Okay, maybe I can do that.
Okay,
So
honey.
I'll do
And
a clap.
yeah, and because sometimes the audio while I'm talking is hard to come across, if you could clap your hands in front of the camera, so I just in front of your face so I can see,
Yeah.
I'll get the visual clue as well. So a quick tip: there's no right or wrong way to do this, but there's a speed or rhythm that might make it more or less fun. So if I want you to go faster, I'll give you the let's go faster signal, so clap more often. And if I want you to slow down and let me breathe a little bit, I'll give you the let's calm it down signal. Okay, but if you're uncertain, err on the side of clapping more often because that's going to be more fun. Okay,
Okay,
are you ready?
cool.
Yes.
Yes. Ready?
Here we go. Once upon a time, there was a man who loved to collect butterflies, and he would go out every day into the field. He would just stay in his house, and he would try to attract the butterflies by putting sugar everywhere. But very few butterflies came. Butterflies came from all over, so this actually worked. All these butterflies came in. The problem is that the butterflies' natural predator birds. The problem was that the superintendent didn't like this at all. So he said, "I'm going to evict you because you can't have a butterfly sanctuary in our." The superintendent said, "Hey, if you're going to have a butterfly sanctuary, I need some money from this. So if you want to stay in this apartment, you need to pay me more." So the guy said, "But I don't have any money. I don't make any money from my butterflies." The man said, no. And he's like, "I'm going to kill you. So I'm going to take over your building." And the superintendent said, "What? You're going to kill me because these butterflies?" The man said, "Yes, because you cannot." The man said, "No, no, no. That was just a threat. I need you to know how serious this is. Just come inside my house." So the superintendent came, and when he saw the butterflies, he was so overcome with them. When he saw the butterflies, he freaked out. He said, "Oh my God, I hate butterflies. They're all poisonous." The man's like, "What? Butterflies are poisonous?" The superintendent says, "Yeah, you didn't know that? They kill people." The superintendent says, "Well, that one is." He looked at one butterfly that had these red wings and black spots, and the man said, "Oh my God, that's not even a butterfly. That's like this chameleon bug." That the man said, "Oh my God, that's the world's most dangerous butterfly. How did it get here? That's all the way from the other side of the world." And the superintendent said, "I brought it here, and I slipped it into your apartment because." The man said, "I don't know, but I'm going to call animal control, and they're going to kick you out, and then I'm going to get your apartment back, and I can stop with this rent control thing you've got going on." So the superintendent, the butterfly. All right, now I've got to stop because I don't know where that story's going. All right, so there you go. That's improv comedy. Those stories
Yeah.
never really end, but there you go. That's an
And you know
example of
what?
improv.
I was actually wondering that I didn't ask the clue how to stop it. I mean, otherwise I saw you getting actually into the flow and then probably the best of it. But yes, it must be exhausting, right?
It's tiring, it's fun, it's high energy, and that then sets up that becomes the premise of my keynote, which is that you feel this way, right? You feel like you're in your work or your life and you've got things all figured out, and then the universe comes along, goes ding, now deal with this. Because life is
This is a
improvisation, and how we
wonderful.
respond to those ding moments is going to ultimately determine whether we succeed or fail.
Yeah.
Wow, definitely a super high thing to learn and actually evolve with.
Thank you.
Wow, Avish, we learned so much from today. This conversation was so deep, so fun, and of course, so much of learning in these last 45 minutes. Am I right, honey?
Definitely, I have taken my notes and I'm going to work on it because I also had registered for an improv workshop sometime here in Bangalore. But I think this 45 minutes call, this conversation, and knowing Avish from his story of how it had got him glory, I think, Avish, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Avish, for coming to Your Story, Your Glory podcast. And I'm sure and I hope that this story will brings you more and more glory in future.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.